The courthouse of Ashford County, Virginia, had never looked so full. Reporters crowded the wooden benches, their notepads resting on their knees, pens poised in midair. Camera crews had been banned from filming inside, but that hadn't stopped them from staking out the hallways, waiting for any glimpse of the people involved in what had quickly become the county's most talked-about trial in years. The crime itself had been shocking enough. A violent burglary that left a man hospitalized and a child traumatized. But it wasn't the brutal details of the crime that had everyone leaning forward today. It was the unexpected witness. Emily Parker, 7 years old. Small for her age, quiet, and if the prosecution's hints were to be believed, holding a piece of the truth no one else had been able to uncover. She sat in the front witness bench, her legs dangling a few inches above the ground, the heels of her patent leather shoes tapping nervously against the polished wooden rail. Her hair was pulled back into 2 neat braids, but a few wisps had escaped, brushing against her pale cheeks. In her lap rested a well-loved teddy bear, one ear slightly torn, the plush worn thin from years of clutching. Emily's small fingers gripped it so tightly, it seemed she might never let it go. Beside her, lying on the floor with his head resting neatly on his paws, was Rex. A German shepherd was an impressive sight. Broad-chested, muscular, his fur a deep mix of black and tan, and his amber eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. A thin leather leash ran from his collar to the hand of Officer Daniel Hayes, his handler. The officer's uniform was immaculate, his posture sharp, but his gaze never drifted far from the little girl beside him. The arrangement was unusual. A police canine in the courtroom positioned beside a child witness. But this wasn't a typical case. Emily had insisted she wouldn't speak unless Rex was with her. No one had questioned the request too much. The court had seen therapy dogs help children testify before. But what made today different was that Rex wasn't just any comfort animal. He was a decorated police dog with years of service. A dog trained to track, apprehend, and protect. His presence here was more than symbolic, though no one yet understood just how much more. Judge Raymond Collins sat high behind the bench, a man in his late 60s with a silver beard that lent him an air of authority. He glanced down at the docket before peering over his glasses toward the witness stand. His voice, when it came, was measured but firm. "Is the prosecution ready to proceed?" The district attorney, Marla Jennings, rose from her seat. She was a sharp, composed woman in her 40s, known for her meticulous attention to detail. She adjusted her glasses and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution is ready." The defense attorney, Richard Boyd, a man whose expensive suit seemed to do all the talking for him, smirked faintly. The defense is ready as well. The air in the room seemed to thicken. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Marla approached the witness stand slowly, as though mindful not to startle the child. "Good morning, Emily," she said softly. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the teddy bear. She gave a tiny nod. "You remember why you're here today?" Marla asked. Another nod. "And Rex is here to help you feel safe, right?" At this, Emily glanced sideways at the dog. Rex's ears twitched, his eyes flicking toward her. Her lips curled into the faintest, fleeting smile before she nodded again. Marla gave a reassuring smile. "Good. Now, Emily, I'm going to ask you a few questions about what happened the night of March 14th. If you don't understand something, you can tell me. Is that okay?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice so soft that some in the gallery had to lean forward to hear. In the second row, a reporter from the Ashford Times scribbled the first direct quote of the day. Marla began carefully, asking about Emily's home, her family, and her daily routine, all to establish trust and ease the child into speaking. But it was clear that Emily's mind wasn't entirely on the questions. Her eyes kept drifting to Rex. The dog, in turn, seemed hyper-aware of her movements, his gaze never straying far from her face. From his seat, Richard Boyd watched this with a hint of amusement. In his mind, the child's distraction was a gift. If she couldn't focus, her testimony might be seen as unreliable. And if her words didn't hold weight, the prosecution's case would weaken. Emily shifted slightly, adjusting her teddy bear in her lap. She stroked its fabric in a slow, rhythmic pattern. 3 strokes down, 1 across, pause, repeat. To most, it looked like nervous fidgeting. To Rex, it was something else. His head lifted slightly, ears angled forward, the way they did when he detected a scent or a signal. Officer Hayes noticed the change and subtly tightened his grip on the leash. He knew this dog better than anyone. Something in Rex's posture told him the animal was paying attention for a reason. Marla continued her questioning, moving closer to the events of that night. Emily's voice grew quieter, her shoulders curling inward. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances. And then it happened. Emily's gaze stopped flicking between her teddy and the dog. Her eyes locked on Rex, and for a long moment, she simply looked at him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, without turning to Marla, without looking at the judge, Emily spoke. Her voice was clear, stronger than it had been all morning. That's him. At first, people thought she was pointing to Rex, and a few chuckles bubbled up in the gallery. The judge's eyebrows rose, but before he could speak, Emily shifted her small hand, extending one trembling finger toward the back row of the courtroom. That's him, she repeated. All eyes swiveled toward the direction she was pointing. Richard Boyd's smirk faltered. Emily swallowed hard, her voice dropping just enough for a hush to fall over the room. He knows who hurt me. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric. Marla froze mid-step. Officer Hayes glanced from Emily to Rex, and in that instant, he saw it, the recognition in the dog's eyes, the focused stare aimed straight at the man in the back row. It was the same look Rex had given in the field when he tracked a suspect. The same unblinking, locked-on intensity that said, "I've found you." The judge banged his gavel once, more out of habit than necessity. Order in the court. But the room wasn't noisy. No one spoke, no one moved. The little girl had just pointed to a man who had, until this moment, been a background figure in the defense's witness list, and she had tied him directly to the crime. And if the sudden tension in Rex's body was any indication, this was only the beginning. The stillness in the room felt unnatural, like the pause between a lightning flash and the crash of thunder. Emily's hand remained pointed toward the back row, her small index finger unwavering, despite the dozens of eyes now fixed on her. Rex hadn't moved either. His body was taut, every muscle engaged, his amber eyes locked on the man she had singled out. Officer Hayes recognized that posture immediately. This was the stance Rex took when his training kicked in, when instinct told him that the person in front of him wasn't just a stranger, but a target. Hayes's grip tightened slightly on the leash, not out of fear that Rex would lunge, but to remind him that this was still a courtroom, not a crime scene. The man in the back row, whose name was listed on the defense's witness roster as Thomas Riker, shifted uncomfortably. His expression was a carefully practiced mask of indifference, but the way his jaw flexed gave him away. He wasn't expecting this. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Parker," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension, "you will need to clarify what you mean by, 'That's him.'" Emily slowly lowered her hand, but her eyes never left Riker. She sat back in her chair, her teddy bear still pressed to her chest. "That's the man Rex found that night," she said quietly, but her words carried across the silent room. He was there. A ripple of whispers passed through the gallery until the judge's gavel slammed down. "Order!" Marla Jennings, the prosecutor, stepped forward cautiously. Her mind was already racing. She had prepared Emily for difficult testimony, but this was unexpected. It was risky, too. Pointing out someone in open court was one thing. Proving it was another. Still, there was something in Emily's voice, something steady and sure, that made Marla take the chance. "Emily," she said gently, "can you tell us why you think Rex knows that man?" Emily glanced down at the German Shepherd. Rex's head tilted slightly, his gaze never leaving Riker. "Because," Emily said, her voice trembling now, "Rex did the same thing before, the night it happened. He stood like this, and he stared, and he wouldn't move." Officer Hayes shifted. In his seat, his memory instantly flashing back to that night. Rex had indeed stopped, circled, and fixated on a man during their search. That man had been questioned, but released. The evidence had been too thin. Hayes had never forgotten it, but without a victim's testimony to support it, the lead had gone nowhere. Riker leaned back, attempting to appear unfazed, but his hand clenched tightly around the bench's edge. Boyd, the defense attorney, rose from his seat. "Your Honor, the witness is a child. She's clearly under the influence of suggestion. A dog can't testify, and this entire line of questioning is irrelevant." "Objection noted." Judge Collins interrupted, his voice sharp. "Overruled for now. Continue, Miss Jennings, but tread carefully." Marla nodded, stepping closer to Emily. "What happened when Rex stood like this, Emily?" The little girl's face paled, and she gripped her teddy tighter. "It was dark. I was hiding behind the sofa. I heard glass break, then loud footsteps. My mom screamed, and I heard Rex barking. Then he growled, just like he's doing now. Though Rex wasn't making a sound at the moment, his entire posture spoke of restraint, the silent, controlled readiness of a dog who knew exactly what he was doing." Emily took a deep breath. "When I peeked out, I saw Rex standing like this, looking at someone. That man?" She didn't need to point again. Everyone knew who she meant. He had a jacket with a tear on the arm, and boots with mud all over. Officer Hayes felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. That was exactly what he'd written in his report from that night. The defense attorney jumped in again. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The witness is clearly recalling events influenced by police reports she's been exposed to." But before Boyd could finish, Rex moved. It was subtle, a slow, deliberate shift forward, his front paws extending slightly as his chest rose. His amber eyes narrowed, his gaze unblinking. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. Emily noticed immediately. Her voice steadied. "See? He remembers." The gallery erupted in murmurs, until the judge slammed his gavel again. "Quiet. One more outburst and I will clear the court." For the first time that morning, Marla allowed herself a flicker of hope. If Emily's recollection aligned with the police canine's logged behavior from that night, it could reopen an angle of the investigation the defense thought was dead. Hayes leaned toward her and whispered, "She's not wrong. That's exactly how Rex acted that night. Exact same posture." Marla's mind was already turning over the possibilities. The original lead had gone cold for lack of corroboration. But now they had something they hadn't before. A victim's first-hand account matching the dog's behavior log. The judge sighed heavily, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Miss Jennings," he said, "you may proceed, but I advise you to establish a clear factual basis for what this canine identification implies." "Yes, Your Honor." Emily adjusted her seat, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of so many stares. But each time she glanced at Rex, her shoulders seemed to straighten just a little. There was something in that dog's calm, steady presence that gave her courage. She spoke again, her voice quieter now, but no less sure. "Rex was there before anyone else. He got to me before the police officers did. He chased someone out the back door. I didn't see his face, but I saw his boots and jacket. The same boots and jacket that man is wearing today. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection. Speculation. The judge waved him. Down. Sustained on the clothing reference. Jury will disregard that last statement. But the jury wasn't disregarding it. They couldn't. Not when the child's words had been delivered with such raw, unaffected certainty. Hayes could see it on their faces. A mixture of doubt and curiosity, the kind that made people pay attention. Rex shifted again, his head lowering slightly, the tip of his tail flicking once before stilling. That was another tell Hayes knew well. The dog wasn't just recognizing a scent or a sound. He was processing a memory. It dawned on Hayes that while Emily was recalling that night in human detail, Rex was doing the same in his own way. Two witnesses, one human, one canine, both pointing, in their own language, to the same man. And if Hayes knew one thing from years of working with Rex, it was this: the dog had never been wrong before. For a moment, it felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Emily's last words still lingered in the space between her and the man in the back row. No one moved. Even the jurors, who had been shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Moments before, now sat rigid and wide-eyed. Rex hadn't moved either, but his stillness was louder than any growl. Every fiber of his body was taut, as if poised for action. His gaze was fixed on Thomas Riker, and if anyone in the courtroom doubted Emily's identification, Rex's reaction was quickly erasing it. Judge Collins leaned forward in his high-backed chair, his hand resting near his gavel, but not yet. Raising it. His sharp eyes moved from Emily to Riker, then back again, as though trying to read the invisible thread between them. "Ms. Parker," he said in a steady but low voice, "please explain to the court what you mean by Rex found that man." Emily's fingers tightened around her teddy bear. She looked at Rex, as though drawing courage from the dog's. Unwavering stare. "That night," she began softly, "I was hiding under the table. I heard the door slam open. There were two voices. One of them was angry. The other was scared." Her voice faltered, and for a moment, she seemed ready to retreat back into silence. But then Rex lifted his head slightly and pressed his muzzle gently against her knee. It was the smallest gesture, yet it was enough. She continued, "I heard glass breaking. Mom screamed. Then Rex barked, loud, over and over. I peeked out just enough to see him chasing someone toward the back door. He stopped right in front of that man, just like now. He didn't move. He just stared. His fur was standing up. I remember thinking, he's telling me something." The room was so quiet, you could hear the faint scratching of a pen from one of the reporters. Emily's eyes didn't leave Riker. "That's the man. I didn't forget." The defense attorney, Richard Boyd, rose quickly, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is a child's recollection from months ago. This is clearly the result of suggestive questioning, possibly even objection overruled," Judge Collins said curtly. "The jury will determine the credibility of the testimony." Boyd sank back into his seat, but not before shooting a glare at Riker, a silent warning to maintain composure. Marla Jennings took a step forward, seizing the moment. "Emily, you said Rex was telling you something. What do you mean by that?" Emily glanced down at the German Shepherd again. "I've seen Rex before. Not just at my house that night. In the park with Officer Hayes. He always moves a certain way when he finds something he's looking for. That night, he was looking at him. It was the same way he looks when he finds a missing person on TV shows. Except this time, it wasn't missing. It was bad." Riker shifted again, his face stiff. It wasn't much, but the movement drew Rex's attention. The dog's ears pricked, and his nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. Hayes felt the leash tighten under his palm. "Ms. Jennings," Judge Collins warned, "be careful in how you phrase your questions. Yes, Your Honor, Marla replied, though her mind was already racing. She had read Rex's incident report from that night. The part where Hayes documented Rex's refusal to leave a particular individual, a man who had fled before officers could detain him. The description had matched no one in custody at the time, but Emily's words now overlapped with those details almost perfectly. She turned back to the little girl. Emily, can you describe what that man was wearing the night you saw him? Emily nodded. A black jacket, but the sleeve was ripped right here. She motioned toward her elbow. And brown boots with thick bottoms. Mud was stuck all around the edges. The light from the back porch made it shine. Hayes's eyebrows lifted slightly. That was word for word what he'd noted in his own report. In the jury box, a few members exchanged glances. They were hearing the same description from two witnesses who hadn't been in contact since the night of the crime. One human, one canine. The defense attorney stood again, this time with a touch more urgency. Your Honor, this is becoming dangerously close to prejudicial theatrics. A police dog's posture is not evidence of guilt, and this child's testimony is clearly contaminated. Before the judge could respond, Rex made a move that silenced everyone. He stood. It was slow, deliberate. His claws clicked softly against the polished wood floor. His eyes never left Riker as he took one step forward, then another, until the leash was pulled taut. His tail was low, stiff, the tip barely twitching. It was a stance Hayes had seen dozens of times in the field, a silent signal that Rex had found his target. The handler gently pulled him back, murmuring a quiet command. Rex obeyed, but reluctantly, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the man in the back row. The room erupted into whispers until the judge's gavel slammed down. Again. Order! Emily's voice cut through the murmurs. That's what he did that night. Every head turned back toward her. Marla took a careful breath. Emily, you're saying that Rex's behavior here in court is the same as what you saw during the burglary? Yes, Emily said without hesitation. Exactly the same? The judge's face was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the little girl for several long seconds before he spoke. Very well. Continue. Ms. Jennings, but know that I expect this line of questioning to connect directly to material evidence. Marla nodded, though her heart was pounding. This was a rare opportunity. She had a child witness making a positive identification, a police canine reacting in real time, and a written incident report from the night in question. If she could tie them together with hard facts, the case might shift dramatically in her favor. She turned to the bailiff. Please have Officer Hayes's incident report from March 14th brought to the stand. As the document was retrieved, Hayes glanced at Rex, who had settled back into a sit but remained on high alert. The handler knew that if dogs could testify in words, Rex's would have already convicted the man. In the gallery, Riker avoided eye contact with anyone. His jaw was tight, and a small bead of sweat rolled down his temple despite the cool air of the room. Marla took the report from the bailiff, flipping to the relevant section. Your Honor, this report, dated the night of the incident, details the canine's behavior during the initial response. Officer Hayes, the handler, noted that Rex engaged in a sustained alert posture, directed at an unidentified male suspect. That alert posture matches what we have just witnessed in court today. Boyd shot up again. Coincidence at best. Overruled, the judge said sharply. Sit down, Mr. Boyd. Marla turned back to Emily. Is this the first time you've seen that man since the night of the burglary? Emily nodded. Yes, but I remembered his boots. And Rex remembered him. And with those words, something shifted in the room. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to make everyone look at Thomas Riker differently. Enough to make him start sweating. Enough to make the jury lean in. And enough to make the defense realize that this trial had just taken a turn they hadn't prepared for. The courtroom felt different now. The moment Emily linked Rex's behavior in court to that night, something shifted. It wasn't just her words. It was the way the dog had stood, the tension in his body, the laser focus on Thomas Riker. Even the most skeptical juror couldn't completely dismiss it. Marla Jennings could feel the room's attention locked in. She didn't rush. If there was one thing she knew about cases like this, it was that sometimes you needed to let the silence stretch, to let the weight of the moment settle before the next reveal. She held up the incident report Officer Hayes had written on March 14th. The crisp paper was folded neatly, but the edges had worn from being handled repeatedly during preparation. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like Officer Hayes to read aloud the portion of his report describing the events after he and Rex entered the property that night." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Hayes stepped forward, taking the paper from Marla. His voice was steady and precise as he read. Upon entering through the east side of the property, Canine Rex alerted at the threshold of the rear hallway. He proceeded down the hall, ignoring other areas of potential disturbance, until coming into visual contact with an unidentified male subject. The subject was wearing a black jacket with a tear in the left sleeve, just above the elbow, and brown boots with heavy tread covered in fresh mud. Rex engaged in a sustained alert posture, body rigid, ears forward, tail low, and refused to disengage until pulled back on command. Subject fled the scene. Hayes lowered the paper. "That's word for word from my notes that night." Marla stepped closer to Emily. "Emily, earlier you described a black jacket, a tear on the sleeve, and brown boots with mud. You've never seen this report before today, have you?" Emily shook her head firmly. "No, but I saw them that night." Marla glanced at the jury, making sure they saw the connection. A 7-year-old child's memory, months later, matched an official police report down to the smallest details that had never been shared with her. The defense attorney, Boyd, pushed himself to his feet, his expression tight. Coincidence. Children absorb information from adults all the time. "Mr. Boyd," Judge Collins said sharply, "you will have your chance to cross-examine. Sit down." Reluctantly, Boyd obeyed, though his jaw worked as if grinding the inside of his cheek. Marla turned back to the witness stand. "Emily, can you tell us what happened after Rex stood in front of that man?" Emily hesitated, her small hands clutching her teddy bear tighter. "Mom was yelling at me to stay down. I heard the man breathing hard, like he was tired. Then Rex barked, and the man said a bad word. He stepped back, and I saw him grab something shiny. Then there was a loud crash, and he ran." "What do you mean by something shiny?" Marla asked. "A knife," Emily whispered. The words seemed to make the air heavier. Hayes felt his stomach tighten. That detail hadn't been in his report. He'd found a knife discarded in the backyard later that night, but it had been wiped clean of fingerprints. If Emily had seen it in the suspect's hand, that was something new. "Emily," Marla said softly, "are you certain it was a knife?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice trembling but sure. "My uncle has one. Like it for fishing. It had a black handle and a long silver blade." From the back row, Riker's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. A slight slump in the shoulders, a tightening around the eyes. It was enough for Rex to react. The German shepherd's head lifted, his ears pricking again, and a faint rumble vibrated in his chest. Hayes placed a steadying hand on the leash, murmuring, "Easy, boy." But he knew Rex wasn't reacting out of aggression. He was reacting to recognition. Marla caught the moment and didn't waste it. "Your Honor," she said, "I request permission to bring Rex closer to the gallery for a controlled demonstration of his identification behavior." The defense was on his feet instantly. "Absolutely not. This is pure theater, and has no evidentiary value. Judge Collins raised a hand. I will allow it, under the condition that the demonstration is conducted in a controlled manner by the handler. Boyd looked like he might explode, but he sat down hard, muttering under his breath. Hayes led Rex down the aisle slowly, passing each row of spectators. The dog walked calmly past the first, second, and third rows without hesitation. Then they reached the fourth, Riker's row. The moment Rex's head turned toward him, his entire demeanor changed. His muscles stiffened, his tail lowered, and his pace slowed until he stopped directly in front of Riker, his amber eyes locked on the man's face. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply sat. It was the exact trained signal for identification. Gasps echoed through the room. One juror leaned forward so far, she nearly rose from her seat. Emily's voice came from the witness stand, barely above a whisper, but clear enough to carry. That's what he did that night. Hayes gave a soft command, and Rex returned to his heel position, but not before giving Riker one last lingering stare. Judge Collins let the murmurs go for a moment before striking his gavel. Order. Continue, Miss Jennings. Marla nodded, her voice calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have just witnessed a demonstration of Rex's trained identification behavior. This is the same behavior documented in Officer Hayes's incident report from the night in question. The same behavior Emily described from her memory. She turned back to the little girl. Emily, did you see Rex do this with anyone else that night? No, Emily said, shaking her head. Just him. The prosecutor let the words hang for a beat before stepping back. No further questions. Your Honor, the judge nodded. Mr. Boyd, your witness. Boyd stood, buttoning his jacket. He walked toward Emily slowly, a practiced look of gentle skepticism on his face. Emily, he began, you're a very brave girl for being here today. But sometimes our minds play tricks on us, especially when something scary happens. Is it possible that you've seen that man's picture somewhere before? Maybe on the news? Emily shook her head. No. Or maybe one of the officers mentioned him to you. No. Boyd tilted his head. So you're telling. You that months after a frightening night, you can still remember the exact clothes, the exact boots, and the exact way Rex behaved? Yes, Emily said simply. Boyd smiled faintly, turning to the jury as if to say children will say anything. But before he could move on, Emily added, I remember, because Rex remembered. I could see it in his eyes. The statement drew a murmur from the jury box. Boyd froze for a second, caught off guard, before trying to regain control. Emily, dogs don't think like people. They can't, she interrupted him, her voice still calm, but carrying an unshakable certainty. Maybe not, but Rex knows. And so do I. For a long moment, Boyd just stood there, staring at her, clearly weighing whether to press further or cut his losses. Finally, he said, No more questions, Your Honor, and returned to his seat, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room now knew that whatever happened that night had left a mark on both the little girl and the police dog, a mark they both recognized in the man sitting just a few feet away. And for the first time, Riker looked like he knew it too. The judge's gavel cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. Court will recess for 30 minutes, he declared, his voice measured but betraying the faintest trace of intrigue. He wasn't about to admit it openly, but he had seen what everyone else had just seen. The little girl's words, paired with the police dog's reaction, had cracked the courtroom's atmosphere wide open. It was no longer the slow grind of procedure. It was electric, unpredictable. Emily sat very still in the witness chair, her small hands still resting on Rex's head. His fur was warm beneath her fingers, the slow rise and fall of his breathing like a steady heartbeat she could borrow strength from. Her eyes flickered toward the gallery where the man sat, the one she had pointed out. He hadn't looked back at her since Rex's growl. In fact, he was now staring fixedly at the table in front of him, jaw tight, the faintest sheen of sweat across his forehead. The bailiff led the jury out, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something else. Suspicion, perhaps even excitement. The prosecutors huddled immediately, their tones low but urgent. One of them, a wiry man with a habit of tapping his pen against his chin, whispered something to the lead attorney. She nodded sharply and stepped toward the door. "Detective Harrow," she called to a tall man leaning against the back wall. "I want every scrap of that incident report from the night of the burglary. And bring me Rex's handler's notes, the original ones. If there's a recording from his body cam, I want it queued up before we reconvene." Harrow didn't argue. He had been a believer in Rex's instincts since the day he joined the force. If the dog was indicating now, there was a reason. He strode out, his long coat sweeping behind him, already dialing his phone. Meanwhile, in the back corner, Rex's handler, Officer Paul Grant, knelt beside the German shepherd. "You remember him, don't you, boy?" he murmured, scratching behind Rex's ear. The dog's tail thumped once, but his gaze remained locked on the man in the witness row. Paul had seen this before, on the street, in dark alleys, during tense standoffs. Rex didn't forget faces. And the night in question, Rex had been nearly uncontrollable when he'd caught this man's scent. The problem back then was that the suspect had an alibi, a shaky one, but it had held enough to keep charges from sticking. No eyewitnesses, no usable DNA, and no way for a dog's behavior alone to convince a judge. But now they had something far stronger. Emily. While the attorneys scrambled, the suspect's lawyer leaned toward his client, his voice a harsh whisper. "Don't react. Don't you dare react." "I didn't do anything," the man muttered, but there was a crack in his tone, a small, involuntary tightness that betrayed him. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "Then why does that kid know details no one else does? Why's that dog staring at you like you're the last bone on earth?" No answer came. In the small side room adjoining the courtroom, the prosecution team worked at a frenzied pace. Harrow returned within minutes, his arms loaded with folders and an evidence box marked with the case number from 2 years ago. "Found the original statements, body cam footage, and the handler's log," he said, laying them out on the table. "And you're going to want to see this." He pulled a still image from the footage, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a man being held by officers on the night of the burglary. His jacket sleeve was torn, hanging by threads. Mud streaked his boots. The prosecutor froze. "Emily mentioned both those details this morning," she said, "and that was never released to the public." "That's right," Harrow confirmed. "Only the officers on scene knew, which means either she saw it herself, or someone who was there told her. And if this guy's our link..." He let the sentence trail off. The implication was heavy enough without finishing it. Grant stepped in then, flipping open his handler's notes. Here, night of the burglary. Rex alerts immediately upon entering the alley. He bypasses 2 other individuals, goes straight to the suspect, and refuses to leave his side until ordered away. "I marked him as a high-interest individual, but..." He shrugged. "No corroborating evidence." "Well," the prosecutor said, a sharp edge creeping into her voice, "now we have corroboration. We have the victim herself." Back in the courtroom, the air felt different as people filtered in for the second half of the day. Whispers passed through the gallery like wind through dry grass. Reporters adjusted their cameras, sensing that something rare was unfolding. Emily was escorted to a bench near the front, Rex curled protectively at her feet. She could feel his steady presence radiating calm. She didn't understand all the legal words being thrown around, but she knew one thing. Rex remembered that man, and she did too. Across the aisle, the suspect glanced toward her and immediately looked away again. His lawyer was flipping through documents with more force than necessary, the sound of slapping paper sharp in the hushed room. The judge returned, his robe swishing as he took his seat. "Let's proceed," he said simply, though there was no mistaking the glint of curiosity in his eyes. The prosecutor stood, a folder in hand. "Your Honor, before we continue with testimony, the state wishes to enter into evidence a series of materials recovered from the original investigation, which have now been reviewed in light of today's developments." She laid the torn jacket photo on the projector. Gasps broke from the jury box. "This image," she continued, "is from the night in question. The torn sleeve, the mud-caked boots, both details described by our witness this morning. Details that, until now, were never made public." The defense objected immediately, but the judge overruled. "Proceed," he said. The prosecutor went on to explain how Rex had indicated the same suspect at the scene, how his behavior had been consistent from that night to the present moment in court. She spoke of the rarity of such unwavering identification from a trained canine, the kind of certainty that came only from a direct link between event and individual. As she spoke, Rex's ears stayed perked, his eyes never leaving the man. The jury noticed. So did the judge. By the time the recess had ended, the case had shifted in a way no one could ignore. What had begun that morning as a straightforward, predictable trial was now a swirling storm of renewed leads, forensic possibilities, and the undeniable sense that the truth was within reach. Emily leaned toward Rex and whispered so softly that only he could hear, "We're almost there." Rex's tail gave one slow, deliberate thump against the floor. The courtroom had been noisy during the recess, but when the bailiff called for order, the shift in atmosphere was instant. Everyone could feel it, the sense that they were about to witness something rare, maybe even historic. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "The state may call its next witness." The prosecutor rose from her table, her eyes glinting with a mix of determination and excitement. "Your Honor, the state calls Officer Paul Grant and his partner, Canine Officer Rex." A ripple moved through the gallery. It wasn't unheard of for a canine to be referenced in testimony, but to have the dog physically present in the witness box, that was almost unheard of. Cameras clicked as Rex stood, his handler giving a quiet signal. Together they moved toward the front, the German Shepherd's steps slow, purposeful. His claws tapped lightly against the wooden floor. Only sound in the tense room. Emily, sitting just a few feet away, straightened in her chair. She'd seen Rex in action before, but never like this, never in front of so many people. She felt a strange pride welling in her chest. When Rex reached the witness area, Grant gave a slight nod, and the dog sat at attention. His gaze didn't drift to the spectators or even to the judge. Instead, it locked unflinchingly on the defendant. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Officer Grant," he said, "you understand that the dog cannot give verbal testimony." "Yes, Your Honor," Grant replied calmly. "But Rex can communicate through trained signals, which I can interpret under oath. I'll be speaking for him, based on my professional experience as his handler for the past 5 years." The defense attorney immediately stood. "Objection. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We cannot cross-examine a dog." The prosecutor didn't miss a beat. "No one's asking the defense to cross-examine the dog. They'll have every opportunity to question Officer Grant on Rex's training, reliability, and record. But given the circumstances and the dog's behavior both today and at the original crime scene, his presence is essential." The judge considered, fingers steepled. Finally, He gave a small nod. "I'll allow it. The jury will give the weight to this testimony they deem appropriate." Grant began by explaining Rex's background, his certification in scent tracking, suspect identification, and crime scene detection. He spoke about the hundreds of successful deployments they'd shared, including several where Rex's alerts had directly led to arrests, later confirmed by DNA evidence. Then the prosecutor moved in closer. "Officer Grant, I'd like you to describe, in detail, Rex's behavior on the night of the burglary 2 years ago." Grant glanced down at Rex, whose ears twitched slightly at the change in tone. "We arrived on scene at 9:14 p.m., Grant began. Rex was deployed to track the suspect based on eyewitness reports of a man fleeing into the alley. Within 30 seconds of entering the alley, Rex bypassed 2 individuals, both later determined to be bystanders, and went directly to Mr. Caleb Dwyer. The name hung in the air like a stone dropped into deep water. Grant continued. Rex positioned himself between Mr. Dwyer and the exit, barking continuously until backup arrived. When ordered to disengage, he obeyed, but remained fixated on Mr. Dwyer. Even when we left the scene, Rex would not take his eyes off him. This fixation is consistent with what we call a primary target lock, a trained behavior when the dog is certain the person in question is the suspect linked to the scent trail. The prosecutor nodded. "And did you observe similar behavior today?" "Yes," Grant said, his voice firm. The moment Rex saw Mr. Dwyer, his posture shifted. His tail stiffened, ears forward, eyes locked. "This is an identical response to what I documented that night." The prosecutor let the words hang before asking the question that the whole room was waiting for. "Officer Grant, in your professional opinion, is Rex indicating that the defendant here today is the same individual from the original crime scene?" "Yes," Grant said without hesitation. "Without a doubt." The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, smoothing his tie like a man about to dismantle an argument. "Officer Grant," he began, "you're aware, are you not, that dogs can be influenced by their handlers?" "Yes," Grant replied evenly. "And isn't it possible," the attorney pressed, "that you, consciously or unconsciously, are guiding Rex's reactions toward my client because you believe he is guilty?" Grant's jaw tightened. "No, sir. Rex is trained to operate independently of handler influence. His alerts are based on scent, not suggestion. In fact, during training, handlers are deliberately kept blind to which individuals are targets to prevent bias." The attorney paced a little. "Still, you can't deny that dogs sometimes make mistakes." Grant's voice didn't waver. "Dogs are living beings. Nothing is 100%. But in Rex's 5 years of service, his alerts have been verified as correct in over 97% of deployments, a higher accuracy rate than many forensic methods." A murmur passed through the jury box. The defense attorney's lips pressed into a thin line. Then came the moment that changed everything. The prosecutor requested that Rex be allowed to perform a scent lineup in the courtroom. The judge hesitated, but curiosity, and perhaps the sense of history, won out. 6 chairs were placed in a row at the front of the room. Only one would be occupied by the defendant. The others would hold stand-ins of similar build and clothing. Grant stepped forward with a small evidence bag, a scrap of fabric from the original crime scene, sealed and preserved. The judge confirmed the chain of custody before allowing it into the exercise. Rex sniffed the bag, his nose twitching rapidly. Then Grant gave a single quiet command: "Search." The German shepherd moved down the line, pausing briefly at each chair. His behavior was methodical, controlled. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of his breathing and claws tapping against the polished floor. When Rex reached the 4th chair, the one where Caleb Dwyer sat, he froze. His body went rigid. Then, with sudden intensity, He barked 3 times in quick succession, the exact signal for a confirmed scent match. His tail was high, ears forward, eyes locked. Gasps erupted in the gallery. The jurors leaned forward. Grant spoke over the noise, his voice steady. Alert confirmed, same as at the scene. The judge's gavel cracked down. Order. Order in the court. For the first time since the trial began, Caleb Dwyer shifted uncomfortably, his jaw working as if he were chewing words he couldn't quite swallow. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something urgent, but Caleb's gaze kept flicking toward Emily, and toward Rex, whose eyes never left him. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. She could see the fear in his face now, faint but there. It was the same fear she had seen the night of the burglary, when the hallway was dark and the stranger had turned toward her before Rex had intervened. The prosecutor ended the session with a final, precise question. Officer Grant, based on Rex's reactions here today and your 5 years of working with him, do you believe the defendant is the man from that night? Grant didn't hesitate. I do, and so does Rex. Rex gave one short bark, almost as if to punctuate the statement. The jury noticed. Everyone noticed. When the court adjourned for the day, the air was thick with anticipation. Reporters swarmed outside, their voices blending into a constant buzz. Inside the quiet of the hallway, Emily knelt beside Rex, burying her hands in his fur. You did it, she whispered. But Rex wasn't looking at her. He was staring down the hall, toward where Caleb Dwyer was being led away in handcuffs. For an unrelated parole violation, a temporary hold until the court could decide how to proceed. Rex's eyes were sharp, unblinking. The hunt wasn't over, not yet. The air in the courtroom was heavy with the scent of paper, wood polish, and nervous anticipation. The jurors had been escorted to the deliberation room 2 hours earlier, yet to Emily, it felt like an eternity. She sat on the bench beside her foster mother, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the frayed hem of her dress. Every now and then, she glanced at Rex, who sat at the foot of her seat, ears flicking toward every sound, eyes alert but calm. The trial had taken a turn, one could have predicted. When Rex gave his trained identification signal earlier that day, the deep, low growl followed by a sharp sit, the jury's posture had shifted instantly. People might have dismissed a child's testimony, but a highly trained police dog's reaction was something far more difficult to ignore. And when that reaction matched a long-buried incident report from the night of the burglary, the case had transformed from a muddled fight over circumstantial evidence into a crystal-clear picture of guilt. The suspect, a wiry man in his late 30s with thinning hair and a perpetual smirk, now sat rigid, no longer smirking. His defense attorney spoke to him in low, hurried whispers, but he stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with the child who had pointed him out. Emily could feel his eyes dart toward her occasionally, quick, furtive glances, and each time Rex's gaze followed like a shadow, never letting him go unnoticed. The judge, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair, re-entered the courtroom, his robe flowing behind him like a dark wave. The bailiff's voice rang out, deep and commanding. All rise. The jurors filed back in, their expressions guarded. Emily tried to read their faces, but she was too young to decipher the subtle signs, the tightness in a jaw, the way a few avoided looking toward the defendant's table. She only knew that something had shifted. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked, his voice even, but with the faintest undercurrent of anticipation. We have, Your Honor, the foreperson said, standing. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't understand all the legal words, but she understood enough. She understood what guilty meant. She understood that if the jury said it, she wouldn't have to be afraid of seeing that man in the grocery store, or hearing his boots on the creaky steps outside her foster home. She understood that it meant Rex's growl, his sharp sit, and her trembling words had mattered. The foreperson unfolded a small sheet of paper. The silence was so complete that the faint creak of wood, as she adjusted her stance, echoed like a gunshot. On the charge of aggravated burglary, she read, we find the defendant guilty. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Emily's foster mother let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Emily's shoulders loosened, but the foreperson wasn't finished. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. The defendant's jaw clenched. His attorney closed his eyes briefly, like a man watching a ship sink before him. And on the charge of witness intimidation, the foreperson's voice was steady, but her eyes flickered toward Emily for the briefest second. We find the defendant guilty, the judge nodded solemnly. The court thanks the jury for their service. You are dismissed. Emily didn't fully register the rest. The shuffle of papers, the clink of handcuffs as the bailiff approached. The defendant, the loud scrape of his chair against the floor as he was led away. What she did feel was the warm press of Rex's head against her knee, as though he, too, understood that the moment they had been working toward, in their own strange, silent partnership, had finally arrived. The courtroom began to empty. People speaking in hushed tones. Reporters scribbled in notepads or tapped frantically on their phones. One camera flash went off, catching Emily's startled expression, and her foster mother quickly stepped in front of her protectively. The prosecutor approached, kneeling so he was at eye level with her. You are very brave, Emily, he said. His voice, usually sharp and commanding in court, was gentle now. You helped bring a dangerous man to justice. You should be proud of yourself. Emily nodded faintly, but didn't smile. I was scared, she admitted. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, he said with a small smile. It means you did the right thing anyway. She glanced at Rex, who was now watching the courtroom doors where the defendant had been led away. He helped me, she said simply. The prosecutor's smile widened. Yes, he did. As they prepared to leave, the judge unexpectedly stepped down from his bench. Judges didn't often walk over to speak to witnesses, especially not children. But this was no ordinary case. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and when he reached them, he removed his glasses, looking at Emily with the kind of gravity that made her straighten instinctively. I have been on this bench for 23 years, he said, and I have never seen a testimony like yours, or a partnership like yours and Rex's. What happened here today? He paused, as if searching for the right words. Will be remembered in this courthouse for a long time. Emily didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Her foster mother gave the judge a quiet thank you, and they began making their way toward the exit. The hallway outside was buzzing with activity. News crews had gathered, hoping for a comment, but deputies formed a protective barrier to escort Emily and her foster mother out. Rex padded alongside, his steady gait never faltering, the gold of his fur catching the hallway's fluorescent light. When they reached the steps outside, Emily paused. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. She crouched beside Rex, burying her face in his thick fur. We did it, she whispered. Rex's tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, as though confirming her words. The prosecutor, standing nearby, overheard her. You know, he said, sometimes justice isn't just about the evidence. Sometimes it's about the truth finding a way out, even when it's been locked up tight. You and Rex, you found a way. Emily smiled faintly this time. We're a team. And indeed they were. A team unlike any other the court had ever seen. In the days that followed, news stories would recount the strange and powerful moment when a little girl and a police dog broke open a case together. Reporters would write about the courtroom canine hero and the child who had given him a voice. But for Emily, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was that she could sleep without the shadow of fear in her doorway. What mattered was that Rex would always remember her, and she would always remember him, the day they stood side by side and changed the course of justice forever. The weeks following the trial felt surreal for Emily. She was no longer just a quiet little girl sitting at the back of a courtroom. She had become someone whose bravery, insight, and memory had helped bring a dangerous man to justice. Yet she didn't fully understand the weight of what she had accomplished. She only knew that, finally, she could feel safe again. Rex, of course, was a constant presence. Every morning, he would sit patiently at her side while she ate breakfast, his head resting near her plate, as if silently guarding her from the world outside. Emily's foster mother, Mrs. Whitman, often joked that the dog had become more of a parent than she had ever imagined. "You two make quite the pair," she said one morning, handing Emily a slice of toast. "I think the neighborhood knows it too. Have you seen all the kids waving at Rex when he's out for walks?" Emily smiled, biting into her toast. "He doesn't care about the waves," she said, though her eyes twinkled. "He's just making sure I'm safe." Rex's ears twitched at the mention of safe, and his tail thumped once against the kitchen floor. It was a small, quiet gesture, but Emily recognized it immediately, the same reassurance he had given her in the courtroom. Back at the police department, Officer Paul Grant had filed the final report on the trial. It was unusual in his experience, even after years of working K-9 cases. The combination of Emily's eyewitness testimony and Rex's precise identification had set a new standard for collaboration between human and canine witnesses. Captain Hayes, who had overseen the original investigation, called a special meeting. "Paul, you know this is remarkable, right?" he said, gesturing toward the detailed notes on Rex's behavior, video evidence, and Emily's statements. "We've never had a child and a K-9 work together in a courtroom like this." The prosecutor said it herself. The jury didn't just rely on the testimony. They relied on Rex. Grant smiled quietly. "He's a good boy. And Emily, she's brave. Most adults wouldn't have handled this with the same courage." Hayes nodded. "I think we should do a public acknowledgement. A press release. Let people see how justice isn't just about procedures. Sometimes it's about heart, instinct, and teamwork." Emily herself didn't fully grasp the fame that would follow. Local newspapers ran stories, and a few television channels picked up the story of a little girl who helped the police dog solve a crime. Her picture appeared beside Rex's, her small hand resting on his head, eyes wide but determined. She read the headlines one evening while sitting on the couch, a mix of pride and shyness washing over her. "They're calling me a hero," she whispered to Rex. "I didn't do it alone." Rex thumped his tail against the floor in agreement, his eyes calm and watchful. Mrs. Whitman, observing the moment, put a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You were brave," she said softly. "But you're right, it's a team effort. Rex and you together. That's something special." Emily nodded and hugged the dog tightly. "We'll always be a team," she said. Meanwhile, the community began to rally around Emily. Her school arranged a small ceremony to honor her courage, inviting local law enforcement officers, including Officer Grant and Captain Hayes. The gymnasium was filled with applause as Emily stepped forward, Rex sitting loyally at her side. "Today, we recognize not just bravery," the principal said, her voice ringing through the hall, "but the extraordinary bond between humans and animals." Emily Parker and her partner, Canine Officer Rex, remind us that courage can come in all shapes and sizes. Emily blushed, looking down at Rex. She whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" Rex nudged her hand with his nose, a small, reassuring gesture, and the audience laughed softly at the obvious connection between the two. Despite the recognition, life slowly returned to its quieter rhythm. Emily spent her afternoons playing in the park, walking to school with Mrs. Whitman, and practicing reading aloud for her teacher. But everywhere she went, Rex was there, a silent guardian and constant companion. One afternoon, Emily paused at the edge of the park, watching a group of children play. One boy ran past her, nearly tripping over a root, and Rex barked once sharply, rushing to intercept and gently guiding the child back upright. Emily smiled, recognizing the familiar instincts that had helped save her months ago. "You're always looking out for everyone," she said, scratching behind his ears. "Just like you did for me." Rex's tail thumped once, slow and steady, as if acknowledging her words. In the following months, Caleb Dwyer's appeal had been denied, the evidence presented in court leaving little room for doubt. The community saw the swift justice as a triumph of modern investigative methods, combining traditional police work with the unique abilities of trained canines south, and the courage of a child who refused to remain silent. Emily's story began to inspire local programs aimed at teaching children about personal safety, animal care, and the importance of honesty. Her experiences became part of community workshops, with Rex often attending to demonstrate the bond between handler and dog. The little girl who had once been too scared to walk home alone now taught others how to trust their instincts and speak up. One quiet evening, Emily sat on her bedroom floor, Rex lying beside her. She held her teddy bear tightly and thought about the night of the burglary, the fear she had felt, and the man she had confronted with nothing but truth and courage. "I was scared," she admitted softly, "but you helped me. We helped each other." Rex rested his head on her lap, tail thumping gently. He didn't need words. Emily knew he understood. Mrs. Whitman peeked into the room. "Dinner's ready, you two," she called. "And you've got a visitor tomorrow. Someone from the local news wants to talk to you about your story." Emily shrugged, a small smile forming. "I guess we'll tell them, but only about Rex and me. The rest doesn't matter." The next day, Emily and Rex returned to the courthouse, not as witnesses, not as participants in a trial, but as symbols of courage and partnership. Children from local schools attended the session, wide-eyed and attentive, asking questions about Rex's training, Emily's bravery, and the fear she had faced. Officer Grant explained how a police dog's instincts worked, while Emily shared her story in her own words. She spoke simply but clearly, showing the younger children how courage and honesty could make a difference. And at every moment, Rex stayed at her side, alert and calm, the embodiment of loyalty and protection. By the end of the day, the children were buzzing with excitement. Some hugged their own pets more tightly on the way home. Others wrote small notes to Emily, thanking her for teaching them about bravery. Emily watched it all, a quiet satisfaction warming her heart. She had faced fear, helped deliver justice, and shown others, in a real and unforgettable way, what courage could look like. As the sun set behind the courthouse, casting golden light across the steps, Emily and Rex walked home together. The streets were quiet, but safe. For the first time in many months, Emily felt completely free from fear. She looked down at Rex and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" Rex gave a soft bark in response, tail wagging slowly. "Yes," she said, smiling, "we really did." And with that, they continued down the path toward home, the bond between them stronger than ever, their courage having left a mark that would be remembered in the community for years to come. Justice had been served, fear had been conquered, and a little girl and a police dog had shown the world the extraordinary power of trust, courage, and partnership.